She didn't leave me, she read me. It was never a loud goodbye, no slammed door, no screaming fight. She didn't storm out, she just disappeared, slowly, like steam off a morning mug. You only noticed when the cup ran cold, and for the longest time, I thought I just missed something. Maybe I wasn't fun enough. Maybe I didn't try hard enough. Maybe it was my looks, the grey in my beard, the softening jawline. But what if I told you it wasn't about any of that? There's a kind of silence that comes before a woman leaves, a quiet that has nothing to do with volume and everything to do with presence. She stops laughing at your jokes, not because they aren't funny, but because she doesn't feel safe enough to let go. She stops reaching for your hand, not because she doesn't care, but because she doesn't feel received. And one day, you wake up and realize she's still in the room, but she's not with you anymore. That's where I was. Not too long ago, we were having dinner, and I looked up, and she wasn't looking back. She was looking through her wineglass, through the candlelight, through time itself. I tried to smile. She smiled back politely, but her eyes had already gone home. I didn't know it then, but she wasn't pulling. Away out of spite. She was retreating from something she couldn't name, but could feel. That morning at CVS, months after we separated, I stood in line next to a woman in her 50s. Soft eyes, subtle confidence, the kind of woman who doesn't chase attention. She draws it. She glanced at me, just a second, and in that glance something familiar happened. She didn't flirt, she didn't grin, she just scanned. Not my clothes, not my face, something beneath it all, and for a moment I felt exposed, not because I was unattractive, because I was unreadable. I realized I had become invisible. Not in the way of youth passing, but in the way of men who no longer carry themselves from the inside out. She wasn't ignoring me. She was sensing me. And what she sensed was the fog I hadn't named in myself. The tension. The quiet grief. The unresolved noise behind my smile. Carl Jung once said that the shadow walks into the room before the man does. And that morning, my shadow walked in first. The tiredness I'd been hiding, the disappointment I'd buried, the resentment I hadn't metabolized. She felt all of it, without knowing a single word about me. That was the first time I understood women, especially after 50, don't fall for your face. They fall for your frequency. And if yours is filled with static, sorrow, and self-doubt, they'll hear that too. You can wear better clothes, fix your teeth, trim the beard, but if you've lost your presence, if your emotional ground is shaking, they will know, not because they judge, but because they're done pretending they don't feel what they feel. I used to ask, why did she leave me? Now I ask, what was I silently broadcasting that made her pull away? That's what this story is about, not looks, not age, but the silent signal a man sends when he no longer lives from within. And maybe, just maybe, it's time we learn to become visible again. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when I could walk into a room and feel noticed. Maybe not the most handsome, maybe not the loudest, but seen somehow. There's a warmth in being seen that you don't fully appreciate until it disappears, and when it did, I didn't notice it at first. It started gradually. Women I'd talked to at gatherings, polite, pleasant, but never lingering. Waitresses would smile, but with that distant professionalism that makes you feel more customer than man. Even my own reflection began to blur. I looked the same, more or less. A few more lines, a few less hairs, but something in the eyes, duller, not tired, just uninhabited. The day I truly felt it, though, was at a birthday party. A friend of mine was turning 60, and a group of us gathered in his backyard. It was a relaxed crowd, wine, music, string lights. And that's when I noticed Rob. Not a Hollywood face, crooked nose, little belly, but grounded. He was just there. Women leaned in, laughed longer than the joke deserved. touched his arm naturally. I had spoken with a woman earlier, Lisa maybe, but her attention faded fast. Yet with Rob, she lingered. Later that night I asked him, "What's your secret?" He just smiled and said, "I'm not hiding anymore." I didn't understand then, but now I do. He wasn't performing. He wasn't guarding his sadness or pretending he didn't fear aging. He was present, holy. Whereas I was trying to be the version I thought women wanted. Confident, cool, put together. But underneath, I was restless, unsure, disconnected from myself. And when you disconnect from yourself long enough, others can feel it, even before you do. That, right there, was the day I became invisible. Because I wasn't really there. You think she's watching your face, but she's not. You think she's gauging how fit you are, how charming, how put together, but that's not what she's tracking. What she's really paying attention to, what she's always paid attention to, even if she can't quite explain it, is your presence, the emotional tone beneath your voice, the stillness or agitation beneath your calm, the feeling she gets in her chest when you walk into a room. It took me far too long to understand this, and the most humbling part, she didn't need words. She didn't need explanations. Her body knew what mine was hiding. Carl Jung said that the shadow is everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves, and the more we deny it, the more it shapes our lives. I used to think that meant my bad habits, my temper, my selfishness, my pride, but as I've grown older, I've realized the shadow is not just the parts we don't like, it's also the parts we were never allowed to show. Tenderness, vulnerability, fear, all those places inside us we were told to toughen up and silence. And here's the thing, even if you refuse to see it, she will, not by choice, not by analysis, but by instinct. A woman over 50, she's walked through fire, she's raised children, she's buried people she loved, she's sat with grief, held it in both hands, and somehow kept living. So when she looks at you, she's not looking for bravado. She's not seduced by polish. She's asking without asking, can you meet me here where I've already been? And if what you bring is armor, is performance, is a man who hasn't yet made peace with the quieter, softer parts of himself, she will feel that dissonance before you even say a word. John Gottman talked about this in different language. He called it attunement, the ability to feel what the other person is feeling without needing to fix it or fear it. And most men? We're taught to solve feelings, not sit with them. We listen for what's wrong, then offer advice. We tighten up when someone cries. We mistake stoicism for strength, when often it's just emotional shutdown wearing a noble face. So she senses that. She senses whether you're with her or managing her. She senses whether you're grounded or pretending to be, and she pulls away. Not to hurt you, not to punish, but because something inside her knows this man is not home inside himself yet. That's the real reason women walk away. Not because you're not enough, but because there's not enough of you here. Because you've buried parts of yourself so deeply that even you forgot how to bring them into the room. She doesn't need you to be healed, but she does need to feel your willingness to be honest. Because the first thing she notices is not your face, but whether your presence says, I'm not hiding anymore. And when it does, when a man arrives whole shadow and all, she relaxes, she trusts, and for the first time in a long time she stays. I used to enter a room and unconsciously adjust, straighten the shoulders, relax the face just enough to seem composed, but not cold. Say the right thing, ask the right questions, nod at the right moments. Like a man performing a version of himself that had always gotten polite approval, never quite rejection, never quite connection either. But it wasn't until everything stopped working that I started to see what had always been missing. There's a strange silence that follows being invisible. You begin to doubt whether anyone actually sees you, or just the shape you occupy. And the more you sense that disconnection, the more You try to compensate, you talk more, smile wider, act stronger, but all it does is amplify the emptiness. One night, I sat alone at my kitchen table. There was no fight, no message from her, just a long silence where a woman's presence used to live, and, for the first time, I didn't pour a drink, I didn't turn on the TV, I just sat there, and I asked myself something I had avoided for decades. Who am I when I'm not performing? It was an uncomfortable question, because the truth was, I didn't know. I had spent so long building the version of me that looked good from the outside that I'd lost touch with the quieter man inside. But in that silence, something else stirred. I remembered small moments, not the big speeches or accomplishments, but the quiet things, the way I used to hold my father's hand. As a boy, silently, without needing to explain anything, the calm I felt when I sat on the porch after a long day, just breathing, the feeling of simply being with someone, not to impress, not to seduce, not to prove, but to be. That was the first time in a long while I felt present again, not because I had something to say, but because I was no longer trying to disappear inside the man I thought I had to be. From that day forward, I practiced showing up differently, not perfectly, not always successfully, but consciously. I started listening without fixing, staying in the silence when a woman shared something hard, instead of trying to make her feel better. I let myself say, "I don't know," without shame. I let my voice crack when I talked about my divorce or my father's death, or the loneliness that followed both. And here's what surprised me most. Women didn't pull away. They leaned in, not because I became more impressive, but because I became more real. There was no strategy, no trick, no masculine frame to hold. Just the willingness to stand inside my truth, even if it shook. Presence is not posture, it's not tone, it's not eye contact, or compliments, or learned confidence. Presence is when you stop hiding, and I don't mean oversharing your trauma or bleeding emotion into every conversation. I mean standing there, aware of your sadness, your regrets, your tenderness, and not running from any of it. That's the man she notices. That's the man who doesn't need to be flashy, or rich, or young. That's the man she can feel, because when you no longer need to protect an image, you become safe, not only to her, but to yourself. They say time heals, but I think time only reveals. It shows you what stayed buried too long. It brings to the surface the patterns you once thought were personality, but were really just defenses, armor passed down from your father, or his father, before him. I used to believe a man's value was in what he could build, protect, provide, but what no one ever taught me was how a man could become a shelter, not a wall, not a fortress, but a place of presence, the kind of stillness that makes a woman exhale, the kind of presence that says, I don't need to control the moment, because I trust who I am inside it. Carl Jung spoke of individuation, not as a goal, but as a remembering, a return to wholeness, to integrating all the forgotten selves we abandoned just to survive. And I see now, that's what she was waiting for. Not the man who promised the world, not the one who tried to get everything right, but the man who was finally whole enough to stop pretending he had to be anything but real. There's a moment in every man's life, if he lives long enough, where he realizes it was never about being the best. It was about being true, to feel the silence between two people and not rush to fill it, to let your hand tremble and not apologize, to meet her sadness with your breath, not your solutions. That's what she notices first, not the line of your jaw, but the line between your mask and your soul. And when that line disappears, when you allow her to see the man who exists underneath the performance, she softens because her body can finally rest, not in fantasy, not in projection, but in truth. So if you've ever felt like you were doing everything right, but still ended up alone, if you've ever wondered why your best wasn't enough, I want to offer this. Maybe it wasn't about being better. Maybe it was about being there, fully, quietly, honestly, not fixing, not performing, just being. And if that feels unfamiliar, if you're just now, after all these years, beginning to feel the weight of your own absence, you're not late, you're just arriving. And that's where everything begins to shift. Not when you change who you are, but when you come home to him, the one she's been waiting for, the one you forgot to bring, the one who never needed to be perfect, only present. So tell me, have you ever felt that quiet ache of being unseen, even while standing right in front of her? Have you ever realized that maybe she didn't love who you are, she loved who you were trying to be, and if so, would you be willing now, finally, to show up, not as the man she imagined, but as the one you actually are? Because when you do, you'll stop chasing attention and start becoming unforgettable. Comment, I showed up fully, if this spoke to something inside you. And one last question, have you ever felt like someone looked through you, but never saw you? Like they scanned the outline, but missed the man? If so, welcome back. This isn't the end. This is the return to you.